Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Jefferson, and welcome again to Block Sports. As a lot of you know, we lost, and for those of you who do not know, may I be the first to say that we lost a pioneer in our sport. This gentleman was a mentor to me, and he was also a founder of HBCU Pro Sports Media, as well as his own business, the Onedin Group. And one of the persons that I would like to mention is Mr. Eric Moore. He was a visionary, and I start this show speaking about Mr. Moore because he was on my show several times. When I first started the show, way back when, he was one of my first guests because he saw where HBCU sports should be. He saw where we could take it in terms of what we should be and what we could be. Back in 1998-99, my uncle that I talk about all the time, Mr. Sam Jefferson, he introduced me to Mr. Moore, and Mr. Moore was over the Black College Sports Information Directors Association as well. And back in 1999, when I was fresh and young to this thing called sports media, my thing was, Mr. Moore, have you thought about being able to introduce streaming to HBCU sports? And of course, in Mr. Moore's own way, and of course, as I said, being a visionary, the first thing he said was, tell me about it. And I told him more about what could be done. He saw it. He understood what could be done in streaming. Unfortunately, when I was able to bring it forth to the sports information directors that represented the HBCU schools that were present here in Indianapolis at that time for the COSIDA convention that BC CIDA was a part of, Black College Sports Information Directors Association. When they took it back to their schools, they couldn't see it. And the reason why those individuals couldn't see it is because they were more interested in butts in the seat instead of looking forward to the future. And today, guess what? If you're not streaming, you're behind the curve. If you're not online, if your school is not a part of the online media frenzy, you essentially don't have a voice. You essentially don't have a way to promote what you're doing. And for that, Mr. Eric Moore, as I said, was a visionary. He saw it. He understood it. He understood what the future could hold for what we could bring to the table. And now, because of the frenzy of what we have today, now everyone wants to be a part of an online media source. Unfortunately, at the time, the SWAC, the MEAC, the SIAC, the CIAA could have been the first. Either one, if not all, could have been the first, and they could have been on this platform. Why? Because I introduced it. Back in 1999. The internet was brand new to everyone. But we could have been the first out there in sports. Now, did others dabble into it during that same time? Yes. But as far as an entire entity being out there first, we could have been first. And Mr. Eric Moore saw it. Mr. Eric Moore was able to understand what it could have brought to the African American community. He understood what it could have done for the HBCU sports community as a whole. and we missed it, but he didn't. And I want to pay my respects to Mr. Eric Moore and to his family. And to Mr. Eric Moore, even though he's not here physically, but he's here in heaven. May you rest in peace, and thank you for the time that we had together and for the wisdom that you imparted upon me and each and every one of us that we had the privilege of spending that time with you. So thank you very much. And I am glad that I was able to say that to you. But more than anything else, I want to just say thank you more than anything else to the Eric Moore family for sharing Mr. Moore with us, because we know more than anything else, it does take a lot of time away from family. And I'm looking forward to preparing for other events that are about to take place. And my wife and I, we just had conversations about that early this morning. And for those of us who are out there doing our gigs and working these sports events, keep it up, because pioneers like Mr. Moore, we have to make sure we continue to live up to the professionalism that he brought to the table. And again, I say thank you. And with that being the case, I do want to bring homage to Mr. Moore by showing scores from the Onedin scoreboard. And what I'm looking for now is making sure that I have all of the scores that are here. And as long as I can see all of the scores, then that means that I can show them and scroll them down for you. And this is going to be courtesy of the Onedin group, Onedin.com, which is the site that Mr. Eric Moore started, making sure that we had access to all of the football games that were out there and scores that were available. And what I will do, I do have all of the scores from the current games, but what I'll do first is I will show you the current games and games that are currently going on from each conference. And so let's go ahead. And this is from the Onedin.com website. And as I said, these are scores that are provided to you. Some of the games have started, some of the games have not. But we'll make sure that we get this information to you as we possibly can. And these scores here are from the SIAC. And let's go ahead and go there. And as you can see, Benedict is taking on Tuskegee. They're traveling to Tuskegee, I should say. And as you can see also, and that game starts at 2 p.m., and also you have Edward Waters traveling to Allen University, and that game starts at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a lot of games that have not started, and then as you can see, you have a couple of games that have started, but we're waiting to see what some of these games are how these games are going to finish up. Now, we also have a couple of other games and also the other conferences. And we only have right now one game that's been scheduled in the CIAA. And that game happens to be between Shawan and Fayetteville State. And so let's go and see the score of that game. And as you can see, Shawan is leading in the second quarter by a score of 21-14. And as a matter of fact, as it shows, this is the CIAA championship game. And it's being played in Fayetteville State in the Salem, Virginia stadium. And as you can see in the second quarter, Shawan is leading by a score of 21-14. And as a matter of fact, let me make sure I'm not making, I don't believe I am, but the SIAC championship game, and I apologize to everyone because there was an error on my part, because the SIAC championship game is scheduled right now, and that game is between Benedict and Tuskegee. And that game has not started, and as a matter of fact, as soon as I finish up with this, I plan on going to see and watch the rest of that game as well myself, because as I said, that game is between Benedict and Tuskegee, and that game is being played in South Carolina. And as you can see, and that game should have already started, and that is the SIAC championship game, and it is being played on ESPN3. And the other game that is being played is between Edward Waters and Allen, which are the two newcomers to the SIAC, and they're going to play to see, hey, you know, who are we? And since we are the new kids to the block. And it'll be interesting to see how well each one of these teams play between Edward Waters and Allen. But as far as between Benedict and Tuskegee, honestly, folks, I put my money on Benedict, even though a lot of people are saying, don't rule out Tuskegee. And I have to understand. I have to give them credit where credit is due. And I apologize to you guys for being very subdued, and it's only because of the loss of my friend, Mr. Eric Moore, so I apologize. But for those who know me, there's no need for me to apologize for my respect for Mr. Eric Moore. But as we continue on, because the one thing he would also say is that the game is continued to being played, and that's what we have to continue to do, is to make sure that we continue to discuss and talk about the games that are currently being played today. And with that being said, let's continue to move forward to the SIAC. I'm sorry, to the MEAC, the MEAC. And as far as the MEAC goes, guys, this is coming down. And right now you have North Carolina Central, and we're going to look at the standings. But in terms of North Carolina Central, they seem to have a stranglehold on the MEAC. They've only lost one game. And with that one game loss, there's to South Carolina State. And when I saw South Carolina State defeating North Carolina Central, I said, well, guess what? South Carolina State is up to their regular old tricks. Is doing exactly for what they did last year, playing possum. Then all of a sudden, as soon as conference games began, they start going through the conference like a hot knife through butter. However, for this year, South Carolina State is not having a year that they had last year. They are coming up on the short end of the stick in terms of conference play. They are actually 1-2, and as we take a look at the scores, they are actually behind Howard University. And with them behind Howard University, that is kind of, for some people, that is a shock. However, not really to me. And I'll tell you why. Because Coach Scott has his team looking forward to actually playing very competitively. They have only lost one game, and the game that they lost was to Central. And if Central wins today, they're in. They are on their way to the Celebration Bowl. And right now, the game that they're currently playing is against Norfolk State. And a lot of individuals are saying, don't count Norfolk State out, even though they've only won one game. Norfolk State has had a really rough road this year. Only winning one game in the conference, and they're not doing too well. And we're going to take a look at the conference standings for each of these schools and how it could eventually finish out. But as we take a look at the scores right now, you have Howard University having only lost one game, and they could be that team that takes over just in case Norfolk State comes up with a huge upset and defeat North Carolina Central. But and I must reiterate, it would be a huge upset if Norfolk State defeated North Carolina Central. It would, yeah. Anyway, I don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening. And I like Coach Odoms. I think he's a great coach. However, I don't see this taking place this upcoming weekend as we go back to the scores. And those are the even though we have Delaware State playing Morgan State and Delaware State, each of them, and everyone currently, the only two teams, let me back up, the only two teams with one loss are Howard and North Carolina Central. North Carolina Central is essentially in the driver's seat. Their only loss is to South Carolina State. South Carolina State is essentially out of the picture because of their losses, and right now they're currently losing to Howard, and they would most definitely be out of the running. And the reason why North Carolina Central, even with a loss, Howard would have to run the table in order to win. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we take a look at the standings. And let's go ahead and while we're talking about it, we're going to now move toward the SWAC conference and look at all of the scores that are there and the scores that are not up on the board as of yet. There are quite a few games, but the games that are currently out there, I should say, I need to make sure that I have the right scoreboard for you for the SWAC. And I may not have that scoreboard for you just yet, and I apologize there for you. And this was something slow on my end, but I'm rectifying that right now so I can pull up their scores and the games that are currently being played right now. Alrighty. And I do have those. And as I make this quick adjustment, and here we are. Okay. And so for the SWAC upcoming games on today, here we are. And these games are scheduled to start at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, which means we have no games that have started yet in the SWAC. And you have Alabama State playing Florida A&M. And these first four games, as you can see, are scheduled to start at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, which is 3 p.m. Eastern, as far as the scores that I would be in the game and in my location. Alcorn visits Bethune-Cookman. And I'm sorry, that game is scheduled for located in Lorman. And Alabama State is hosting Florida A&M. Prairie View travels to Arkansas Pine Bluff, and Southern will be hosting Mississippi Valley State. The game that everyone is looking forward to as far as the East Division goes is Jackson State versus Alabama A&M. That game is at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, and if Jackson State wins this game, they win the East Division, and they will be marching towards the SWAC championship game again. And more than likely, I cannot guarantee, but more than likely, because they are undefeated, that game will more than likely be at Jackson State, and as it was last year. And hopefully we have intentions of going to that game this year and hosting our pre and post game shows there, but we shall see upon in regards to how that game eventually ends up. And also the last game for tonight will be Texas Southern hosting Grambling, and that game will have some huge implications because Texas Southern is playing very good ball this year, and we will see whether or not they can continue to play good ball and continue to play as well as they have been playing. The one thing I can easily say is Texas Southern has been a great surprise this year, and if they continue, and as I have been saying, there are no easy outs in the SWAC conference. At one point in time, I was saying that Valley and Texas Southern were playing some very good ball. Unfortunately, Mississippi Valley fell on very hard times this year, and they have not been able to play as well as we thought they would. They still play hard, but the score, or should I say their record, does not indicate how well they have played against other teams. Some of the games have been blowouts, but for the most part, they still play very good and very hard football. Now, as we take a look at the standings and what we have to look forward to, we will take a look at the CIAA first. And with the CIAA, as we mentioned, Shawan is playing Fayetteville State, and Fayetteville State again is playing in the championship game. They are 5-0, as you can see in conference play, as well as Shawan. Virginia Union had been beating everyone in the conference, including Valdosta State, but they came up short against Shawan. And Shawan qualified, and as you can see, Shawan and Virginia Union ended up with the same conference overall record, the overall conference record, and Shawan ended up with an overall record of 7-3, whereas Virginia Union ended up being 9-1. But in conference play, and especially in the Northern Division, Virginia Union lost to Shawan, which of course knocked them out of the running to play for the championship game today. And that qualified Shawan to play against Fayetteville State. And as you saw, Fayetteville State was behind by a score of 21-14. That score is being led by Shawan right now. And we're going to continue to monitor those scores and see whether or not they can come back and perhaps win the game against Shawan. But we'll see, because those games are currently being played right now, and we'll just have to follow up. Now we're going to take a look at the SIAC. And as I mentioned, as far as the SIAC is concerned, you have Benedict playing against Tuskegee. And each of these teams are 7-0 in conference play. Overall, Benedict is undefeated. And Tuskegee only lost 2 games this year. In the division, Benedict was 6-0. Tuskegee ended up being 4-0. Kentucky State, surprisingly, played exceptionally well this year, even though their overall record was 4-6. But in conference play, they ended up being 4-3. I didn't see that coming. But the one thing I will always say about Kentucky State is that because of the team that was put together from last year, these players are carrying over from what they did, I would say, from last year to this year. And that running game, that vaunted running game that they have, just continued to wreak havoc on a lot of teams. I was able to see Kentucky State play against Central State this past weekend. And Central State, because they were at home, this is a big rival game between those two teams. Central State was able to pull out a win 31-30 against Kentucky State. And even though it didn't truly have any bearings on the standing for that game, Kentucky State could have ended up being, and as we go back to the standings, they could have ended up being 5-2 instead of 4-3. But and their overall record would have been 5-5. But unfortunately, the cards didn't fall the way Kentucky State and Coach Ramon Johnson wanted them to, of course, have a better record, play a lot better. But, of course, in that game, and last weekend, that was the windiest game I had ever been in my lifetime. I've seen and had productions in games that were sunny, games that were rainy, just a little bit. As a matter of fact, come to think of it, I don't think I've been in a rainy game except for track and field. But that game was exceptionally windy, and the passing game was almost non-existent in some aspects, even though Central was able to pass with some success. But it was all the running game that really was the most success that each team had. Now, and as we continue, let's go ahead and take a look at the MEAC. Now, in regards to the MEAC conference, this is where the tail of the tape is. As you can see, North Carolina Central is sitting on top with the conference record of 3-1, with an overall record of 7-2, and outside of Delaware State, they are the only two teams with the winning record. And as you can see, North Carolina Central has a 7-2 overall record, and Delaware State has a record of 5-4. But in conference play, as you can see, there are only two teams with one loss. And that one is North Carolina Central, of course, and the other team happens to be Howard University. Now, Howard, as we discussed earlier, Howard University right now is playing South Carolina State. And the last we saw, South Carolina State was losing to Howard. Now, in regards to where things are going right now for Howard University, Howard would really have to win out if, which is a huge if North Carolina Central loses to Norfolk State. And here are the games again that are being played today. But if North Carolina Central loses to Norfolk State, then of course with the records as they are, with Howard only having one loss, and if they win today over South Carolina State, they would be in first place again. But Howard lost to Central, but Central would have to lose today for Howard to have a chance to make it to the Celebration Bowl. Now, there was a conversation that North Carolina Central had the better team in all of HBCU, and that was a conversation, that was a discussion that permeated a lot of media conversation. However, I said, I don't think so. Jackson State is playing some pretty good ball in terms of all of HBCU football. And all of a sudden, North Carolina Central was defeated by South Carolina State. Now, if we go back and look at the overall records, South Carolina State has an overall record of 3-6, 1-2 in conference play, whereas North Carolina Central had only lost 2 games. Now, as it stands, I still say that Jackson State, in all of HBCU, as it was last year until they were upset by South Carolina State, I still say Jackson State has the best team in all of HBCU, and I mean across the board. Now, North Carolina Central, as far as I'm concerned, has the second best team in all of HBCU. Don't get me wrong. I understand you have the Bowie States of the world. You have the Benedicts of the world. You have the Virginia Unions of the world that are out there. But in terms of what you have with Central and J-State, I think those are by far heads and toe above everybody. They're heads and shoulders above everyone that's out there. Heads and toes. I wonder where I got that from. So let's continue to move forward from there. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think anyone will defeat North Carolina Central, and I don't think Norfolk State will defeat North Carolina Central today. And however, as I said, we will take a look, because if North Carolina Central ends up winning today's game, guess what? They move forward to the Celebration Bowl. Now, in terms of their opponent for the Celebration Bowl, we go now to the SWAC Conference. And in terms of the SWAC Conference, you see right now sitting on top of the division is Jackson State, and they sit on top of the East Division, whereas Prairie View sits on top of the West. Jackson State, of course, played Prairie View last year to advance to the Celebration Bowl. And if things hold true the way they're going right now, there could be a repeat of what took place on last year. Prairie View has, and I shouldn't say it like this, and I do apologize to UAPB, because UAPB, they actually made it to the championship game in last spring when we had, during COVID 2 years ago. And they made it to the championship game against Alabama A&M. Unfortunately, the tide has really turned against them, where they have not performed as well as they should have lately. And Prairie View, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be playing Arkansas Pine Bluff, and they will be traveling to Pine Bluff to play this game this weekend. And the other game that will play a major role is going to be Texas Southern. Because if anyone falters, and I think between Texas Southern and Southern, but Texas Southern holds the tiebreaker against Southern because Texas Southern defeated Southern University. So if Prairie View falls, as far as I'm concerned, Texas Southern has the advantage. Also, Alcorn is lurking back there in the background, but the only problem is that the teams that are at the top defeated Alcorn. And not only that, but if Jackson State continues on their trend forward, then guess what will happen? Let's go back and look at the standings again. If Jackson State continues their trend forward, defeating Alabama A&M, and they would have to lose twice because they hold the tiebreaker against Florida A&M. And if Florida A&M wins today and also defeats Bethune-Cookman in their finale, and only having one loss, if Jackson State loses today against Alabama A&M and then loses to Alcorn, I believe that game is next weekend, then Florida A&M would qualify to go to the SWAC championship against perhaps Prairie View, because unfortunately Arkansas Pine Bluff, they have not won a game in conference play this year, and I don't see Pine Bluff being a roadblock for Prairie View today. And let's go back and look at the games that are scheduled for today. I'm not looking at the scores, but I'm just pulling up the games that are scheduled today, and here they are. And as I said, the games that are currently scheduled today and for the SWAC, here they are. And you have Grambling against Texas Southern, Florida A&M against Alabama State, which is going to be a really good barn burner, because even though Alabama State is, I believe right now they're in second place against Florida A&M, that game could be a really big barn burner because A&M FAM has to travel to Alabama State. And then, of course, Alcorn is playing against Bethune, which is slowly but surely finding their way. So if Alcorn doesn't watch it, they could be upset in this game. And, of course, Southern University hosts Mississippi Valley. Arkansas Pine Bluff hosts Prairie View, and Alabama A&M is going to play Jackson State in the Gulf Coast Classic, or the Gulf Coast Challenge. And it shows that Jackson State is going to be the home team, but this is in the backyard of Alabama A&M. And as I said, if Jackson State holds on, they're moving ahead to the SWAC championship game, and they're working on something that has never been done in J-State history. They're working on a completely undefeated season. Now, Jackson State has had many undefeated SWAC schedules and SWAC seasons, but they have never had an undefeated season. Last year, prior to going to the Celebration Bowl, they only had one loss. And even then, that was one of the best records that Jackson State had ever accomplished. This year, if Jackson State finishes the regular season undefeated, this could be Jackson State's first undefeated season ever. And if they move forward to the Celebration Bowl and win the Celebration Bowl, this could be Jackson State's first undefeated season ever. And this is what we're looking forward to. And with all of this being said, I'm going to cut today's show short, and because there are many games that are out there that are currently being played, and my goal is right now is to take a quick look at some of the scores again and see where we are in terms of the scoreboard, and let's see where we are. And stranger things have happened, because guess what? In the North Carolina Central and Norfolk State game, guess what? Norfolk State is leading in the first quarter. They are leading North Carolina Central by a score of 7-0. That's going to be an interesting game. And also in the second quarter, we have Benedict, and this is for the SIAC championship game. We have Benedict that is leading Tuskegee by a score of 21-7, and then of course Shawan is still leading Fayetteville State by a score of 21-14. Now, one of the other things that I did not mention are some of the other games from teams that are not in HBCU conferences, and that happens to be Hampton against Elon. And Hampton at halftime is losing to Elon by a score of 21-17. And hopefully they'll be able to pull that game out. But we'll see. We'll keep a close eye on that. But the game that I'm looking at right now is this huge game between, and as I said, this is going to be a very interesting game, whether or not North Carolina Central can pull this game out. And if they don't pull this game out, that's going to be kind of an interesting stat for how this ends up, because this will put a lot of things in play, because Howard University is still ahead of South Carolina State by a score of 21-7, and with Norfolk State leading Central, this could be a very interesting game. This could be a very interesting weekend, because with Howard winning and Norfolk State currently in the lead of North Carolina Central, this would put Howard back in first place against, should I say, in the MEAC conference. Interesting games, guys. Interesting games. But guys, with this being said, I'm making this show short. In homage to Mr. Eric Moore, and showing you all the respect in the world and your family. As I said, may God bless you. May God keep you and your family strong during this time of bereavement, and in all that is done and in all that is said. Don't take anything for granted, folks, because you never know when it's going to be your time, and you never know things that have not been said. If you haven't said something to your loved one or to a friend, take the time to say it now, because you never know when it's your time to go home. So with that being said, may God bless you, may God keep you safe, and support your favorite HBCU, because I don't know about you, but all of my money goes to Jackson State University, and it will continue to go to J-State. So God bless.